Late on a Friday night, the kind of night when the city's pulse slowed to a dull throb and common sense quietly slipped out the back door, a small roadside bar glowed against the darkness. Neon signs buzzed and flickered, casting tired red and blue reflections across rain-stained windows. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of spilled beer, fried food, leather jackets, and the faint metallic hint of trouble that always seemed to linger in places like this. Old rock music hummed through battered speakers, loud enough to drown out thoughts but not loud enough to mask tension. At the center of the bar sat a group of bikers, leather-clad and loud, their laughter spilling over itself as bottles clinked and boots scraped against the wooden floor. They occupied space the way they lived life, boldly, unapologetically, daring anyone to challenge it. Most patrons knew better than to look too long in their direction. This was the kind of place where you minded your business or became the night's entertainment. The heavy wooden door opened without ceremony. There was no dramatic slam. No announcement. Just a quiet creak as it swung inward. A few heads turned instinctively. Steven Seagal stepped inside, tall and composed, moving with a calm that felt almost out of place amid the noise. He wore a black jacket and simple jeans, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for attention. And yet, attention found him anyway. It wasn't in the clothes. It wasn't in his posture. It was in the stillness he carried with him, like a storm resting just below the surface. Beside him walked his wife. She moved with quiet grace, her expression calm and reserved, eyes forward, shoulders relaxed. She wasn't trying to draw attention. She didn't need to. There was a dignity in the way she carried herself that contrasted sharply with the bar's chaotic energy. She looked like someone who knew exactly who she was and didn't feel the need to prove it. Together, they scanned the room briefly and chose a corner booth away from the noise. No words were exchanged between them. They didn't need to speak. Their movement alone suggested familiarity, trust, and a shared understanding that silence could be more powerful than sound. The bartender noticed them immediately. His eyes widened for just a split second before he caught himself. He gave a subtle nod in recognition, the kind of nod that said, "I see you, I know who you are, and I'm going to mind my business." This wasn't a place where people crowded celebrities. It was a place where you either respected the room or became a cautionary tale. Steven nodded back politely. They sat. The noise continued, laughter echoing, glasses clinking, conversations overlapping. For a moment, it seemed like the night would pass quietly. But arrogance has a way of sniffing out calm, like a predator mistaking stillness for weakness. One of the bikers noticed her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his arms covered in tattoos that told stories no one asked to hear. Alcohol sat heavy in his system, loosening his tongue and sharpening his sense of entitlement. His eyes lingered too long. His lips curled into a smirk. He elbowed the biker next to him and muttered something low. They laughed. Not the kind of laughter born from humor, but the hollow, mean-spirited kind that feeds on someone else's discomfort. The biker leaned back in his chair, confidence swelling with every drink. He watched her openly now, his gaze disrespectful, invasive. The bartender frowned but said nothing. Experience had taught him when to intervene and when to wait. Most people would have looked away. This biker didn't. He believed he owned the room. He rose to his feet, boots thudding against the floor, swaying slightly. Not drunk enough to fall, but drunk enough to feel invincible. His friends watched with interest, some amused, some uneasy, but none brave enough to stop him. They had seen this before. He liked to test people, liked to embarrass them. It made him feel powerful. He took a step toward the corner booth. Then another. Steven noticed him immediately. He didn't stiffen. He didn't glare. He didn't move at all. One hand rested calmly on the table, the other around his glass. His wife looked straight ahead, unbothered, trusting him completely. Her calm wasn't ignorance. It was confidence. The biker leaned against a nearby table, pretending to admire something on the wall, though his eyes never left her. He grinned, loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. "Well, well," he said, voice thick with mockery. "Didn't expect to see a princess wandering into a place like this." Laughter erupted behind him. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the bar whispered, "Here we go." She didn't respond. She didn't even turn her head. That silence irritated him more than any insult could have. He stepped closer. "What's wrong?" he continued. "Cat got your tongue? Or is your boyfriend there keeping you on a tight leash?" He jerked his chin toward Steven. Still nothing. Steven lifted his eyes slowly. Not with anger. Not with threat. With calm. A calm so deep it unsettled the biker mid-smirk. For just a second, doubt flickered across his face. Steven's gaze wasn't fixed on him like a rival. It was measured, almost curious, as if he were observing a reckless child edging too close to a fire. The biker scoffed and looked away, forcing a laugh to cover the unease creeping up his spine. "Hey, sweetheart," he said louder, emboldened by the attention. "You sure you're in the right place? Women like you don't usually come here unless they're looking for a little fun." The bar went quiet. Even the music seemed to fade beneath the weight of the moment. A man near the pool table muttered under his breath, "He's done." She finally turned to look at him. Not with fear. With disappointment. The kind that cuts deeper than anger ever could. The biker felt it. His grin faltered. That look told him she didn't see him as a threat or even an equal. She saw him as beneath her attention. That realization burned. Before he could push further, the bartender spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Hey, leave the lady alone." The biker raised his hands in mock innocence. "What? I'm just being friendly." "That wasn't friendly," someone muttered. The biker snapped back, "Mind your business." The tension thickened. Steven set his glass down gently. The sound was soft, almost delicate, but it echoed louder than a shout. The biker froze. Steven turned his head fully now, his gaze locking onto the biker with quiet precision. "That's enough," he said. 2 words. Spoken without heat. Without threat. Without effort. The biker's laughter died instantly. A murmur rippled through the bar. Someone whispered, "He doesn't know who that is." The biker swallowed and forced another laugh. "Oh yeah. And what are you gonna do about it?" He stepped closer, invading their space, pointing a finger inches from Steven's chest. Steven didn't flinch. His wife placed a gentle hand on his arm, not to restrain him, but to ground the moment. A silent understanding passed between them. She trusted him completely. "Walk away," Steven said quietly. The biker shook his head, arrogance battling the sudden instinct to retreat. "Nah, I think I'll stay." He leaned in again, voice dripping with bravado. "You think you're tough because you're quiet? You think that scares me?" No one laughed this time. The biker felt the room closing in on him. Eyes drilled into his back. Phones began to rise. He was no longer in control of the scene, and that terrified him. Steven remained seated. That was the most frightening part. There was no rush, no posturing, no visible aggression. Just stillness. Total control. "Last chance," Steven said. The biker hesitated. Pride won. He shoved forward. It happened so fast most people barely saw it. Steven's hand moved, smooth and precise, intercepting the biker's arm and redirecting his momentum. The biker's balance vanished. His boots slipped. He hit the floor hard, the impact echoing through the stunned bar. Gasps filled the room. The biker scrambled, confused, humiliated, fear flashing in his eyes as Steven rose just enough to pin him, effortlessly, without cruelty. There was no rage in his expression. Just certainty. "Respect," Steven said calmly, "is earned. Not demanded." The biker's bravado shattered. His friends rushed forward but stopped short, something in Steven's posture warning them not to cross that line. They helped their friend to his feet, eyes downcast, voices quiet. Steven returned to his seat. Picked up his glass. The bar erupted into whispers, awe, disbelief. Phones buzzed. Videos uploaded. The lesson spread instantly, faster than the biker's pride could recover. Steven's wife sat beside him, untouched, composed, her presence steady as ever. The biker left with his head down. The bar slowly returned to life, but something had changed. Everyone had witnessed it. Not a fight. A lesson. Calm had defeated arrogance. Silence had crushed noise. And respect had been restored without a single raised voice. The couple finished their drinks quietly and stood to leave, exiting the bar the same way they entered, without spectacle. Behind them, a story was already going viral. And the lesson would linger far longer than the bruises. The door closed behind them with the same quiet creak it had opened with, but the room they left behind felt permanently altered. Conversations resumed slowly, cautiously, as if people were afraid to disturb whatever invisible force still lingered in the air. The jukebox kicked back on, rock music filling the silence, but it sounded different now, muted, almost respectful. At the bar, patrons leaned toward each other, voices low. "Did you see how fast that was? He didn't even look angry. That biker never saw it coming." Phones were everywhere. Clips were being replayed, slowed down, zoomed in. People rewound the moment again and again, trying to understand how something so subtle could have such a decisive outcome. There was no wild swinging, no dramatic showdown. Just calm, precision, and inevitability. The biker sat slumped on a stool near the bar, his helmet at his feet, hands shaking as he wrapped them around a glass of water the bartender had pushed toward him. The alcohol buzz was gone now, replaced by a dull ache in his pride that throbbed worse than any physical pain. His friends stood around him, quieter than usual, their earlier laughter nowhere to be found. "Man," one of them muttered, "I told you to chill." The biker didn't respond. He couldn't. Every time he lifted his eyes, he caught someone staring. Some with judgment. Some with amusement. Others with something closer to gratitude, like they were glad someone had finally put arrogance in its place. Across the room, a woman whispered to her friend, "That's what real confidence looks like." Another nodded. "Did you notice?" He never once raised his voice. Outside, the night air was cool and damp. Streetlights reflected off wet asphalt as Steven and his wife walked side by side toward their car. No rush. No tension. Just quiet steps and steady breathing. The chaos they'd left behind didn't follow them. It never did. She glanced at him briefly, her expression soft, understanding. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Always." They got into the car and pulled away, the bar's neon glow shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. Inside the bar, the story grew with every retelling. By the time last call rolled around, versions of the event had already started to inflate. In some tellings, the biker had flown across the room. In others, 3 men had tried to step in and backed off instantly. Someone claimed they'd heard a pin drop before it happened. Another swore the biker's friends froze like statues. None of it mattered. What mattered was how it made people feel. By morning, the videos were everywhere. Clips appeared on feeds with captions screaming instant regret, calm dominance, wrong guy to mess with. Comments poured in from around the world. "Silence is deadly. That's how you handle disrespect. Real power doesn't need to announce itself." People debated whether the biker deserved it. Most agreed he did. Some argued it should have gone further. Others praised the restraint more than the action itself. Martial arts forums dissected the movement frame by frame. Body language experts analyzed posture and eye contact. Psychologists chimed in about ego, insecurity, and the illusion of dominance. But the average viewer didn't care about technical breakdowns. They cared about the lesson. The biker woke up late the next day with a pounding headache and a phone full of notifications he didn't want to read. Friends had tagged him. Strangers had found him. Messages ranged from mockery to harsh truths. "Hope it was worth it. Maybe next time keep your mouth shut. Alcohol doesn't make you tough." He stared at the screen, jaw clenched, replaying the moment in his head. The look in that man's eyes. Not anger. Not fear. Just certainty. The realization hit him harder than the fall had. He'd never been in control. He'd only thought he was. Back at the bar, the bartender wiped down the counter and shook his head, chuckling softly as a regular brought up the video on his phone. "Crazy night," the regular said. The bartender nodded. "Some people come in loud. Some leave quiet." The bar went on. Nights blurred together. New stories replaced old ones. But that lesson stuck. Not because of how violent it was, but because of how controlled it was. Weeks later, the clip was still circulating. Reaction videos popped up. Podcasts referenced it. Comment sections kept filling with the same idea repeated in different words. Stay calm. Choose control. Respect matters. And somewhere, in a quiet moment far from neon lights and spilled beer, a man who had once believed he owned every room he entered learned that true power doesn't need to shout. It just waits. And when it moves, regret follows instantly. Days passed, then weeks, but the night refused to fade the way most bar stories did. It lingered. It clung to memory. It resurfaced in conversations that had nothing to do with bars, bikers, or alcohol. It became shorthand for something larger, something people instantly understood without needing details. Don't be that guy, someone would say. You'll end up like the biker. The video kept circulating, cropping up in places no one expected. Office break rooms, gym locker rooms, group chats, late-night scrolling sessions where one clip led to another. People who had never stepped foot in a roadside bar watched it with the same fascination. Not because they admired violence, but because they admired control. The comments never stopped. Thousands of them. Men talking about restraint. Women talking about dignity. Older viewers talking about how respect used to mean something. Younger viewers talking about how rare it was to see calm authority instead of chaos. The algorithm fed on it. Each repost pulled in a new wave of viewers, each wave adding their own interpretation, their own projection, their own unresolved frustrations. Some saw a lesson in masculinity. Others saw a warning about alcohol and ego. Many simply saw something deeply satisfying, arrogance meeting reality in the cleanest way possible. The biker tried to disappear. He stopped going to that bar, avoided certain places, switched off notifications. But the internet doesn't forget easily. Screenshots circulated. Slow-motion edits magnified every misstep. Reaction creators paused at the exact moment his confidence collapsed, freezing his expression like a cautionary photograph. For the first time in years, he felt small. Not because someone hurt him, but because someone exposed him. He replayed the night in his head constantly, not the fall itself, but the moments before it. The warnings he ignored. The silence he mistook for weakness. The calm he failed to understand. He remembered the way the room had turned on him, not violently, but morally. No one cheered for him. No one defended him. His friends had gone quiet because even they knew he'd crossed a line. That realization cut deepest. Meanwhile, the bar itself gained an odd kind of fame. Regulars joked about it being the place where arrogance died. New customers came in asking where it happened, which booth, which spot on the floor. The bartender answered politely but without enthusiasm. To him, it wasn't entertainment. It was a reminder of how quickly nights could change. Sometimes he wondered what would have happened if the biker had walked away. He knew the answer. Nothing. And that was the point. Elsewhere, far removed from the noise of social media, Steven and his wife went on with their lives. No interviews. No statements. No reactions. They didn't repost the clip. Didn't acknowledge the headlines or the debates. The incident wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a story to be told and retold. It was over. That, too, fascinated people. In a world obsessed with clapping back, showing receipts, and escalating conflict, the quiet refusal to participate felt almost rebellious. Analysts pointed it out. Commentators praised it. Others were frustrated by it. He didn't even capitalize on it. That's the most powerful part. The clip eventually slowed, as all viral things do. New content replaced it. New scandals rose and fell. But this one never fully vanished. It resurfaced whenever discussions turned to respect, ego, or self-control. Someone would drop the link. Someone else would say, "That video." Everyone knew which one. Months later, a man sat alone in his garage, engine off, helmet resting on the seat beside him. He stared at the concrete floor, hands clasped together. The noise that once defined him, laughter, engines, shouting, felt distant now. He wasn't broken. He wasn't changed overnight. But something had shifted. For the first time, he questioned himself. Not in anger. Not in shame. In honesty. He thought about how easy it would have been to walk away. How nothing had forced him forward except his own need to feel bigger than someone else. How quickly that need had collapsed when faced with something real. He exhaled slowly. Some lessons arrive gently. Others announce themselves loudly. And some, like that night, arrive silently, then echo for the rest of your life. Back at the bar, on a different Friday night, the same neon lights flickered. The same music played. New faces filled old stools. Someone laughed too loud. Someone told a bad joke. Life continued. But every now and then, when a drunk voice rose a little too confidently, when someone pushed just a little too far, the room would shift. Someone would clear their throat. Another would say quietly, "Not worth it." And it would stop. Because somewhere in the collective memory of that place, and far beyond it, a line had been drawn. A reminder etched not by force, but by composure. That true strength doesn't rush. It doesn't boast. It doesn't need witnesses. It simply waits. And when arrogance finally steps too close, regret follows, swift, silent, and unforgettable. Time moved on, but the night refused to become just another forgotten clip buried under newer distractions. It lived on in memory, not because of how dramatic it was, but because of how restrained it had been. People didn't remember yelling or chaos. They remembered the stillness. They remembered the pause before everything changed. In comment sections, the same sentence kept appearing in different forms. He never lost control. That was what stayed with people. Years later, someone would stumble across the video late at night, half asleep, thumb scrolling aimlessly. They'd watch it once, then again. They'd sit up a little straighter the second time. Something about it felt different from everything else online. It wasn't loud. It wasn't edited to death. It didn't beg for attention. It commanded it. The biker's moment of humiliation became less about him and more about what he represented. He was no longer just a man in leather who drank too much and crossed a line. He became a symbol of unchecked ego, of false confidence, of what happens when insecurity wears the mask of dominance. And the man he confronted became something else entirely. Not a hero in the traditional sense. Not a savior. Not even a victor. He became an example. Quiet authority. Measured restraint. Unshakable composure. Those words followed the clip wherever it went. Teachers referenced it in discussions about conflict resolution. Coaches shared it with their teams, not to glorify confrontation, but to emphasize discipline. Parents sent it to their sons with messages that said nothing more than, "Watch this." Even people who disliked violence found themselves nodding in agreement. Because it wasn't about hurting someone. It was about stopping something before it grew worse. About drawing a line without screaming. The biker eventually rebuilt his life, piece by piece. He never spoke publicly about that night. Never defended himself. Never explained. Silence became his shield, too. Whether by choice or necessity, he learned what it meant to keep his head down. Some nights, when he caught his reflection in a window or mirror, he remembered the feeling of standing in that bar as every eye turned on him. The heat in his face. The sudden understanding that he wasn't admired or feared, just pitied. That memory stayed sharp. It taught him something pride never could. Back at the bar, new stories came and went. New arguments flared and fizzled. But something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere. People were quicker to intervene. Quicker to de-escalate. The memory of that night hovered like an unspoken rule. You don't need to prove anything here. The bartender noticed it most. The way voices lowered when things got tense. The way people chose to step back instead of forward. He never said a word about it, but sometimes, when wiping down the same corner booth, he paused for a moment longer than necessary. Not in reverence. In recognition. Somewhere far away, the couple who had sparked all of it continued living quietly. They didn't chase the legacy that others built for them. They didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. It always had. And that was the final lesson, the one that lingered long after the video stopped trending. True strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek validation. It doesn't linger for applause. It enters quietly. It acts decisively. And it leaves without looking back. The world, loud and restless as ever, keeps chasing noise. But every once in a while, It pauses, drawn to a moment where silence won. And in that pause, people remember. Calm is power. Respect is everything. And arrogance, when it meets reality, always pays the price. Long after the clip stopped circulating at the speed of outrage, long after newer scandals and louder moments pushed it out of the spotlight, something about that night remained lodged in people's minds. It became the kind of story that resurfaced not because an algorithm forced it back, but because someone remembered how it made them feel. It came up in quiet conversations. Between friends sitting in parked cars. Between co-workers after tense meetings. Between strangers sharing a drink and talking about moments that changed how they saw the world. Did you ever see that video, the one in the bar? They never had to explain further. The lesson was understood. The power of restraint. The danger of ego. The difference between confidence and control. For many viewers, the night became a personal reference point. The next time they felt disrespected, the next time someone tested them, the memory surfaced. Not the fall. Not the humiliation. The calm before it. The pause. The choice. Some chose to walk away. Others lowered their voices. Stepped back. Let things go. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. Because they had seen what real authority looked like, and it didn't look like shouting. Years passed. The bar changed owners. The jukebox was replaced. New neon signs went up. The booth in the corner was reupholstered. To a stranger walking in, nothing about the place hinted at what had happened there. But the regulars knew. There was a quiet respect for that corner. An unspoken awareness that some moments leave fingerprints on a room. Every now and then, someone new would get a little too loud, a little too confident. Voices would rise. Chairs would scrape. And before it could escalate, someone, often a stranger, would step in calmly. Hey, not worth it. And it would end. Not because of fear. Because of memory. Somewhere else, in a different city, a man once defined by noise found himself defined by silence instead. He rode less aggressively. Spoke less loudly. Listened more. The world didn't applaud the change. No one congratulated him. But that was fine. The lesson hadn't been about recognition. It had been about reflection. And reflection, when it finally arrives, is rarely public. The story continued to live on screens and in conversations, but its greatest impact happened off camera, in moments no one recorded. In choices made quietly. In tempers restrained. In pride swallowed. That was the true reach of that night. Not the views. Not the comments. Not the shares. But the countless times someone remembered it just in time to stop themselves from becoming the next cautionary tale. Because the hardest lessons aren't taught with fists. They're taught with presence. With composure. With the kind of calm that leaves no room for doubt. And somewhere, in the collective memory of millions who watched that night unfold, the message settled in and stayed. You don't need to dominate a room to command it. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. And you don't need to prove your strength to anyone who matters. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is remain still. And let arrogance defeat itself. Even after all the commentary faded, after the debates cooled and the reactions slowed, the night remained alive in a quieter way. It became something people carried with them rather than something they talked about openly. A reference point. A mental image that surfaced when emotions threatened to spill over. It showed up in unexpected moments. In traffic, when someone cut another driver off and anger surged for a split second, then softened. In arguments that could have turned ugly but didn't. In bars, gyms, offices, and public places where egos brushed too close together. People remembered the stillness. They remembered how nothing needed to be said beyond a few words. How power didn't need volume. How control didn't need approval. That was the real aftershock of the night. The biker had long since faded from public attention, but the lesson he embodied never did. He became a silent example of how quickly the roles can reverse, how fast confidence collapses when it's built on nothing solid. No one needed to mock him anymore. His role in the story was complete the moment he hit the floor. Not physically, but psychologically he had been confronted not by aggression, but by reality. And reality doesn't shout. It waits. Some nights, the bartender would catch himself glancing toward the door when it opened, half expecting that same calm presence to step inside again. It never did. But the memory lingered like a shadow, subtle, steady, impossible to ignore. He noticed how the room responded differently now. How tension didn't escalate the way it used to. The bar had learned. So had the people. Years from now, most would forget the exact details. The words spoken. The order of events. The shaky phone footage. But they would remember the feeling, the sudden clarity that came when arrogance met something immovable. They would remember how quickly the loudest person in the room became the smallest. And how the quietest person never changed at all. That was the paradox people couldn't stop thinking about. Strength that didn't announce itself. Confidence that didn't demand space. Authority that didn't need permission. The story didn't need an ending where someone cheered or clapped. It didn't need justice spelled out or victory declared. It ended the only way it ever could, with calm returning to the room, dignity intact, and a lesson delivered without excess. Because the most lasting lessons are the ones that don't feel like lessons at all. They feel like realizations. And once you've had them, you can't unsee them. You notice arrogance faster. You recognize insecurity sooner. You understand that real power doesn't chase attention. It attracts respect simply by existing. That night wasn't about a biker. It wasn't even about a confrontation. It was about the moment when chaos knocked on the wrong door and was met with absolute composure. And that moment, quiet and controlled, continues to echo wherever people choose restraint over reaction, dignity over dominance, and calm over noise. Because in the end, the loudest thing in that bar wasn't the laughter, the insults, or even the fall. It was the silence that followed. And silence, when it carries truth, is impossible to forget. In the end, there was no dramatic aftermath, no lingering confrontation, no final exchange of words. The night simply exhaled and moved on, carrying with it a lesson that didn't need repetition to be understood. The bar returned to its rhythm. Glasses clinked. Music played. Laughter slowly found its way back into the corners of the room. But something invisible had settled into the walls, something that would surface whenever arrogance threatened to take control again. People remembered. They remembered that power doesn't always look the way they expect it to. That the most dangerous presence in a room isn't the loudest voice or the biggest posture, but the one that remains steady when everyone else loses balance. The biker learned that lesson in the harshest possible way, without fists flying, without chaos erupting, without a single scream. Just a quiet collapse of ego in front of witnesses he could never erase from memory. That kind of regret doesn't fade quickly. It reshapes you, whether you want it to or not. And those who watched, both in that bar and far beyond it, carried the lesson forward into their own lives. Some would never even realize how often it guided their choices. Others would recognize it clearly, feeling it pull them back from moments that could have gone wrong. That was the true impact of that night. Not the viral clips. Not the headlines. Not the comments arguing over who was right or wrong. But the silent shift in understanding. That respect is not demanded. That dominance is not proven by volume. That real strength doesn't need to announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits. And when arrogance finally steps too close, the response doesn't need to be loud, brutal, or excessive. It only needs to be precise, controlled, and undeniable. The bar eventually emptied. The lights dimmed. The doors locked for the night. But the lesson stayed behind, lingering in the quiet, ready to surface the next time someone mistook noise for power and calm for weakness. Because some regrets arrive instantly. And some lessons, once learned, never leave.